Due to the graphic nature of its content, listener discretion is advised.
From the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli, we fight our country's battles in the air, on land and sea. First to fight for...
On this episode of Cigars and Sea Stories, Mike and Juslin are in the CNS studios. We're chatting via Skype with Tim Lawson of, what's your current podcast? One Too Many, correct?
Yeah, that's probably the one I'm most well known for right now is the One Too Many Veteran Suicide podcast.
Awesome. And can you tell us a little bit about that? I mean, what goes into One Too Many?
Yeah, so One Too Many is on a small hiatus right now as I sort of look at how I want to approach the project season to season, all year round. But it started out as just, I as a veteran, as a survivor of my own suicide attempt, I looked at the culture we have in suicide prevention, specifically with military veterans, because for the past 2 or 3 years, that number 22 a day is just everywhere. And that's really what it started becoming, was just the number everywhere. And I didn't feel like we were having the right conversation to actually prevent any more suicides. We were just telling everybody that there was a lot of suicides. So I wanted to create a program and a project that really showcased almost the stories behind veteran suicide, what's actually happening with each individual. And I feature veterans that have gone through suicidal behavior, whether or not they've attempted, they've at least contemplated, they've pondered it, they've thought about what it may be like to want to take their own life. And then I talk to friends and family members that have actually, had to go through the loss of a loved one, a service member that took their own life. So, I get both sides of the story, but we really hear from them what was going on in those moments. We find out from the veteran what got you there and what stopped you. Like, that's just such valuable information. It's, the veterans are like the number one resource in this whole crisis, and like we're doing so little effort and actually like providing them outlets to talk about why they didn't kill themselves. Right. And then on the other side, when you're a bystander, you don't know how to be a bystander. Nothing prepares you to be someone on the outside looking into a suicide case. And so, hearing from mothers that that have lost their sons and daughters to suicide, and hearing what she did see that she, honestly sort of ignored, and what she didn't see that maybe now that she's aware, the next time it happens, she can be more aware. And not necessarily seeing signs, but even seeing some more of those preliminary things, because you're so much closer to the individual. So, that's sort of, I guess, the long-winded answer of what the mission of is. It's to create understanding for a crisis that people have a hard time talking about, and I'm trying to make the conversation easier.
Right on, very cool. Now, I mean, this is not your first podcast that you went through. You've done a whole slew of podcasts. You want to talk more about that? My
podcast library is always vast. Changing. I first started, so a lot of people associate my up and coming as a podcaster with the Veteran Empire podcast. But shortly before the VE podcast, I did one called A Couple Good Ideas, which was associated with a little relationship blog that I had at the time. And me and my friend Jason did this podcast. It was probably about 4 years ago. And this was back when like no one knew what a podcast was, and if people did know what a podcast was, they weren't even like your target audience to get them to listen to it,
Right.
And now I'm sure you guys know it. You talk to people about podcasting, and people say, "Oh, I want to do that," or they listen to like some of the bigger stuff. This is like way back when like the average person, you'd explain to them what it was, and they still didn't quite get what you were talking about. Like, what, isn't that the radio? And so. But what was cool about it is we quickly, for a small amateur podcast, like I had this stick mic that I plugged in my computer. I didn't do any editing. It was just plug in, hit record, talk, and then publish. And even that, like we got, we were getting a few hundred hits per episode really quickly, because the industry wasn't saturated with podcasts like it is now. And then moving on to the Veteran Empire podcast, and I was, Alfie and B over at Veteran Empire were nice enough to bring me on and let me just sort of take the reins with this idea and just do what I wanted with it. And it quickly became a really well-known podcast in the veteran space. At the time, it was one of its kind. It was the only podcast when it first came out that was focusing on veterans in post-military life and like what they were doing outside the military, especially in those creative fields. And it really, I'm not asking for anybody to attribute this to me, but I think it really paved the way for shows like Command Your Business and Fire and Adjust and Cigars and Sea Stories and stuff like that, to make people that would like to consume these stories, these post-military efforts. It became something that people were interested in, and then everybody got a chance to sort of niche down in their own podcast. So, I'll never go down in the history books, but I like to think that part of my legacy will be, trailblazing almost the veteran podcasts.
Absolutely. Yeah, and we could have credited you with that, definitely.
Thank you.
No, I sincerely would. I mean, you were one of the very first people that I talked to, actually the first podcaster that I spoke with and seeking advice on how to do this type of stuff. Plus it definitely helped that I was reaching out to a fellow Marine.
Yeah.
So, I mean, like, thank you so much in helping us get this thing going. Believe it or not, we took a lot of your advice in doing what we do now.
Very cool. I appreciate that. And the thing that made the Veteran Empire podcast so successful so quickly, and so no one said no. Like, that's one great thing about the veteran space. If I could get in front of you and say, hey, I want to feature you on this veteran show because you're a veteran, whether or not they're interested in doing the show, they're still going to say yes, because that's what veterans do for each other, right? That's still that camaraderie and that military, support the guy to your right and left. And so, when I got in front of, Olympic gold medal athletes and Tim Kennedy and, who else? I mean, it's a slew of, bigger names that, no A-list celebrities, but still people that are difficult to get in front of. I think I had a leg up on other people requesting interviews because I was doing a veteran-focused podcast, and that quickly that made it much easier for them to say yes and make time for it.
Right, yeah. No, I know what you mean. We're actually pretty blessed in that regard also, because we've got a few other folks that, have very interesting stories, and they're willing to share it with us. That's one of the things that we love about what we do as far as Cigars and Sea Stories is we love to be able to promote the positive, effective change that veterans are bringing to the table every day. And what's great about it is that all of these guys are really approachable people. We all are veterans, and there's that camaraderie that happens instantaneously, but also there's a collaborative effort. We talk all the time about the enemy being the need, and providing good quality content out to these guys, but even more so, competition is an adjacent unit. It is collaborating together in order to address the need that's out there. And that's been the greatest thing about working with veterans, especially within the media realm. We've got authors and artists, and other collaborators across the nation that help us out with a lot of these different things. So, yeah, I definitely understand what you mean. We're looking forward to shining the light on a number of different people, not just, hey, this is my mission and what have you, but also sharing the sea stories that happen to them, with them, along those lines, which we can get into some sea stories in a little bit here,
By the way, Cigars and Sea Stories may very well be my favorite name for a veteran-themed podcast.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome.
I mean, of course, I'm biased to Veteran Empire because that name just sounds badass. But I think specifically for a podcast, Cigar and Sea Stories is such a you're gonna get a lot of interest just off the name alone.
Wonderful. Yeah, I hope so. Yeah. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, review.
Yeah, we can talk. I could talk podcasting all day. I'm ready.
Well, so you're also doing another one, right? It's like Bromantic Vacation or something.
I am doing I'm podcasting. Like I know there's big names like John Lee Dumas and Adam Carolla that are making millions of dollars podcasting, but they got like a couple podcasts. I got some podcasts. Like I start with a couple good ideas, and then Veteran Empire. Both of those have been put to rest. VE was what I didn't manage to get nominated for an award for that one, only to lose to This American Life. So I'm not really too upset with myself on not getting that award. And then shortly after Veteran Empire was done, I found myself in I really, I'm studying broadcast journalism right now, and I'm going to American University on the GI Bill, and it's like I just want to take everything I can, throw it against the wall, and hopefully when I graduate, something sticks. And so I've just been churning out podcast ideas, and I've had to dismiss at least hundreds of, at least 100 of them in the past couple of years. But I found myself started doing the Bromantic comedy. Me and my friend Brandon. That's sort of we put that on pause for the summer so that we can both sort of readjust our professional lives and figure out really what we want to do with that show. But I started doing Tim and Derek Do What They Want with my buddy Derek, who just wanted to give podcasting a try. And fortunately, I'm in a really cool situation where Blog Talk Radio at the beginning of the year invited me to be on their platform, and the exchanges, I bring all my programming to them and they give me hosting for free. So I can just do a podcast, with hosting costing me nothing. And, even though it's only saving me like $20, $30 a month, it's nice to know that there's no resistance there on just throwing a podcast into the feed and seeing how it works and seeing if it feels right, if the flow of shows is right, if I'm getting the guests and the interest and stuff like that. So my buddy Derek wanted to try to podcast. I'm like, cool, let's do it. We did about 50 episodes, and he was like, you know what, I'm done. And I'm like, all right, well, I guess that show's done. But I do a show called For Warriors, which is, I don't want to say it was the replacement for Veteran Empire, but it was at the tail end of Veteran Empire. Lock and Load Java, which is an Army-owned coffee company, they were sponsoring it, and I told them, I was like, look, I'm stopping Veteran Empire, but if you want to still be associated with the podcast, we can change the way that we can change the way that you compensate me, and we can make this like a commissioned show and not just a sponsored show. And so we started Fuel for Warriors, which is their tagline, and it's actually a show branded for them versus just a show that they sponsor, which makes them very much more involved in the conversation and makes people more aware of who they are throughout the entire show versus just that little plug. And that's worked out really cool, and it's given me an opportunity to continue to be active in the veteran space outside of suicide, because I can tell you, like, veteran suicide gets a little daunting after after a while. And I really liked just having that constant connections with the veteran space. So fortunately, they were on board. So Fuel for Warriors is a thing. I've been fortunate enough to already, like, in its infancy, have people like Kyle Carpenter on the show. And so that show has already, sort of gotten a great set of guests. You guys will actually be on it very soon, probably within the hour of me talking right now. And yeah, so I mean, I'm trying to think, is that it? Like, am I? Oh, and then I'm doing a show called, I forget the podcast that I do. That's how many I try. I'm doing a show called Mighty Mighty Marson House. I've been into hip hop for a really long time, and I've always wanted an outlet to talk about it, and because now that I'm 30, I have fewer friends immediately around me that listen to it and we have time for conversations to talk about lyrics and stuff like that. I really wanted an outlet for it, so I collaborated with a friend of mine in Philly who has a recording studio out there, pretty much just letting me use his brand and his connections to make this. So they do, Marson House is the recording studio out there. So we just branded and named the podcast after them. And it's a show where I talk to rappers and MCs and stuff about how they got introduced to hip hop, how they started rapping. We really start delving into their lyrics and deciphering some of the things that they mean and get the stories behind them. It's a really interesting show. So much so where my girlfriend, it's actually she says that's my favorite. That's her favorite show of mine right now. So a lot of potential there. And then I'm constantly, at least 3-4 times a month, people are coming up to me like, "Hey, I have this idea for a podcast. Do you want to collaborate?" And of course, I have to say no every time because I need to eat and sleep sometimes. But yeah, and then I did a short one on homelessness in D.C. for an independent study at school. I did a 10 episode podcast series called How to Be Homeless in Washington D.C. And I interviewed homeless people on the streets and talked to them about how they maintain their lives while being homeless. I didn't care about how they became homeless. I just wanted to know, like, right now, like, how are you eating? Where are you sleeping? Like, what do you do with your money? That was a really fascinating project, too. I'll probably end up doing a follow-up to that next year.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it really goes to show that in this kind of burgeoning industry, there's so many different opportunities you can really follow. And
so many,
and it's a very creative space in that regard, where really an idea that seems off the wall is entirely plausible,
Yeah,
and it's just a matter of finding the right people, or just straight up just legging it, start hoofing it.
Yeah, and it's so I'm a part of Podcasters Paradise. Are you in Podcasters Paradise?
No.
No, okay. I'm trying to think if that's how we got introduced. But I guess so. Podcasters Paradise is this community that John Lee Dumas, who does Entrepreneur on Fire, started. I got into it just to sort of stay on top of what podcasters are doing and what they're thinking. There's like over 1,000 people in this group, and there's a Facebook group that's sort of the center of it all. And I see people talk like, oh, I'm really excited to do this. Like, I'm going to start my podcast that's going to talk to people over the age of 40 who are into sailing in the on the Atlantic coast or something like that. And it's like, that's great. I just really hope you understand the ceiling that's on that. Like, I think that people see podcasting as this great way to like start a conversation or reach an audience, and it is, but the more you niche down, the more active your audience is going to be, but also the lower the ceiling is going to be on how many people are going to listen week to week to week to week. And that's been one of my biggest challenges in podcasting is, how do I keep it niched down enough to have an active audience, but I'm constantly removing the ceiling from my reach? And that often comes with making sure I have guests that completely encompass the theme and the culture of the show, but also introduce me to a new audience, to their audience. And that's been one of my focuses when I invite guests on, is who can I have from a different industry that still fits the mold of my show?
Well, that's actually a question, because that's one of the early pieces of advice that we've been following, is to, once you find your niche, to really drill down on that and not sort of waver, because that's what you're building off of. What's your experience with that sort of concept?
Yeah, so for Veteran Empire, this is why I ended up doing so many shows. At one point, I was only doing VE and the Bromantic comedy, and that was it. So it was 2 shows, simple, right? And that's probably where I should have stopped there. But I wanted to talk to everybody. Like, I would meet someone, I was like, man, I want to talk to you. I want to have a conversation with you that I can like share with people. And so I started wavering a little bit. Like, I started doing quarterly non-vet interviews, right? So I'd have someone who wasn't a veteran who was supportive, and like I would find a way to make it like okay for them to be on the show, but really it was just my excuse to interview them, right? Because with some people, I had Nate Ravitz, who is as a senior analyst, I think at ESPN. He probably has a more impressive title than that, but I met him, and I really wanted to talk to him and interview him, and so I included him a part of this like non-vet series, right? And same thing with like Matthew Van Dyke, who is this like freedom fighter in Libya. He was an American, and he had there was military themes there because he was like working with the Libyan military and stuff like that. But it still was a stretch on having him on, and so with my current shows, I've tried to be more committed and more disciplined in having people that absolutely fit the mold, but also still going as far out of that mold as possible, as long as it fits the niche, right? So an example would be, if I had a podcast, and this is a podcast I've always wanted to do, if I had a podcast on like motorcycles, right? If I had a show that talked to people who rode motorcycles, and we were talking about what they rode, where they like to go, stuff like that. If I found out that the backup quarterback for the Jets liked riding motorcycles, he's obviously not someone you can associate with that, but he'd fit the mold of the show because it's about motorcycles. As long as he can come on and speak insightfully on that topic, he fits the mold, and now that gives me a whole new audience to promote the show towards, and to possibly get interested in more shows in the future. So I think that's what's fun about niching down and trying to stay committed to that niche while also still finding new audiences to expose yourself to while still staying committed to the culture of your show.
Yeah, it's funny that you should mention that, especially right at the tail end, remaining committed to the culture of your show, because that's one of the biggest things, the biggest takeaway here is, I love that we have a Marine on. I love that you're sharing with us how you add value in the world every day. I love the fact that you have an inspiring mission where you want to go out and share these individual stories. I mean, such is our own focus. We want to be able to show how, yes, Marines and FMF corpsmen are adding value to the world, but we also like to interview prominent veterans from across the spectrum. So our listeners are going to be, hearing Army Rangers such as Joe Trainer Jr. and his efforts out at his retreat in the Oasis, and another Ranger, Marty Scovelin and what he's doing, and bouncing around amongst prominent veterans who are adding positive, effective change to the world and thereby adding value. But the interesting thing, and this is what I love about it, is any Marine, any FMF corpsman can be a guest on our show. And the whole idea is you can share in the conversation. You can ask, hey, we're going to have interviews with, I don't know, if we have Jake Wood or Arlie Ermy or Dale Dye, all of these wonderful, fellow Marines that we would like to have on the show. Wink, wink.
Jake Wood's a good interview.
Right? And he's a great guy, and he's a fellow EBV graduate. So we really want to have all of these folks on as far as interviews, but also to share their sea stories, because that is the defining moment amongst our lives and our audience members' lives where it clicked for them. A good sea story or an event that took place in Iraq or Afghanistan, or maybe how they use their processes now. Maybe they're, a cook or an electrician or whatever, and they learn some trick in the Corps that they use in order to, achieve great success. Now we're dying to hear that. So it's great that you're sharing your mission and how you actually went into this. I mean, what did you do in the Marine Corps? Did it lead into podcasting?
No, I mean, that's the thing. Like, if you look at what I did in the Marine Corps and look at like what I'm trying to do now, other than the veteran themes of what I'm doing right now, it's like, where did that come from? Mm-hmm. I was a Marine security guard in the Marine Corps. So I was posted at embassies overseas. Like, I was in the Marine Corps for 5 years, and a little over 3 of it was, doing this embassy stuff. And so it was the majority of my career, especially considering the amount of time that boot camp and MCT and stuff took. So I was posted in Algeria and Russia and Peru, standing post at these embassies and making sure the right people were getting in and the wrong people were not. And I did a lot of travel, and I did a lot of communicating. Like, I think that's where like the real tie is. Like, I was constantly talking to people. Like, at the time I was studying like social dynamics. Like, personally, I was reading books on like social dynamics and how to more easily talk to people. And I think that really led to me being comfortable with the idea of doing podcasting. I've always been, one thing the Marine Corps definitely enhanced in me. I've always been this way, but something that really enhanced in me was, if you're interested in doing something, just do it. Like, if you want to take initiative on something, now's the best time to do that. And that's how the MSG program worked. I got wind of it, I looked into it, I realized it was cool, and I applied as soon as I was able to. Anytime an opportunity came up, I didn't really hesitate to put my hat in the ring for consideration. So when I got out of the Marine Corps and a friend of mine was like, hey, like, you have that blog, have you ever thought about podcasting? I was like, no, but let's try it. Like let's that sounds great. Let's do it. Let's hit record and see if people listen. And people listened. And then, I saw an opportunity with Veteran Empire, and I took initiative, and I just sort of started doing it. And a lot of that came from the initiative that the Marine Corps enhanced in me. It came from mission accomplishment. I knew what the goal was. I knew what accomplishment felt in that initiative, and I at least got that far with each of the things that I did. And I knew getting the transition of the Marine Corps the military is tough for anybody, and I felt like I was prepared, not just like blindly saying, oh, I know what I'm doing. I actually felt prepared. Like I knew I'm going to try to do this professionally, and I'm going to consider school here. I still almost fell flat on my face because just the transition's tough, and I knew that I was going to need more stuff on my resume. I knew that I was just going to have to just try stuff and see what works, and then pursue that. And over the past 3 years, all the stuff that I've tried, random jobs that I hated, and podcasting and blogging and speaking and all this sort of stuff, I've realized, okay, here's the things that I like doing, and boom, now I'm going to start going for it. And I had sort of the same mentality in the Marine Corps, and that's definitely what's transitioned over.
That's awesome.
It seems like you have a good talent for speaking and articulating, especially having done some research on your own while in the Marine Corps.
Yeah.
So what's a story of how you use that kind of to, mess with a superior or fuck with boots or, let's get into the nitty gritty here. Let's get down. Yeah. And I know you MSG guys do a lot of messing around.
Yeah. So, okay. So part of being able to get guests and being able to walk up to people or inquire with people that maybe feel out of your league professionally, that definitely came from my comfort zone. There came from a couple instances in the Marine Corps. My first year in the Marine Corps, in the FMF, was as a aviation supply specialist. I was a 6672 by trade on my contract, and so I spent a year ordering airplane parts. Well, I was smart and smarter, and when I say that, my OIC and my staff and so I see, they saw all right, here's a guy that we can rely on. And so I was given the responsibility of working with high priority parts, right? So if something was keeping an aircraft on the ground, that's what I cared about, and specifically to the V-22 Osprey. And so as a PFC and a Lance Corporal, I'm in these high priority meetings with warrant officers, lieutenant colonels, the COs of these squadrons, pretty much telling them, sir, you're not getting your frickin' part. And that's final. I can't, there's nothing more I can tell you. You can try to throw your collar at me all you want. I can't. That doesn't mean that I can call up Pax River or Quantico and just have them say that part's in Iraq. I'm not going to call Iraq and tell them, oh, by the way, I'm being threatened by a full bird. I need that part. And so I got comfortable with telling high leadership. And when you're a PFC or Lance Corporal, it's anything with brass or anything shiny, you just feel like you're a liability in that situation. This could go wrong really quickly. And I sat at a table. Sometimes my gunny couldn't even make it to the meetings where it's just me. It's just this Lance Corporal at a table full of pissed off warrant officers because their aircraft's on the ground. They're getting yelled at by their superiors. And I got to either give them good news, yep, it's on the way, or sorry, man, you can yell at me all you want, still not getting that part. So, yeah. Take that and, now, put me in this diplomatic world where, similar to how PFCs and Lance Corporals are sort of fearful of these, the superiors in their world, high enlisted personnel, officers, stuff like that. Now you have low-level diplomats foreign service officers, new MSGs, people like that, and you put them in the room with the ambassador of that embassy or the deputy chief of mission, which is the pretty much like the ambassador's XO, and they get nervous. They don't know how to how to interact with them, and that just came natural to me. Like the deputy chief of mission in Algeria used to come over to the Marine House and shoot pool and drink with us, and I was on a softball team with the ambassador in Moscow, and just interaction with the highest point of leadership in that area just came natural to me. So when fast forward to podcasting, when I'm at these conferences or I'm at meetings or at networking events, or I see someone on TV and I'm like, I want them on my show, I don't hesitate at all of stepping up and introducing myself and making it clear that I feel like while I understand that they are more significant than I am, I don't feel like they're any better than I am, and I want to work with them, and that often gets a really good response. And even if people don't, agree to the collaboration, I at least get their respect in how comfortable I am in interacting with them.
Well, it's the age-old adage, everyone puts their pants on the same way,
Yeah.
How many times do we hear that in the Marine Corps? Oh, he puts his pants on just like you.
Yeah, you do, and you get paid 4 times as much as I do to do so.
Hey, whatever, man.
Whenever
I see them with all their medals jangling, I just think to myself, you know what? You guys can have that job. I'm rocking pajamas and boots and killing people. So there's that give and take.
It's funny how you'll be at a unit or whatever, and like for 9-10 months out of the year, you're like, you're respecting the rank, and then you go to the ball and you see that chest candy, and you're like, I am not messing with that guy. Like, it could be a corporal. It's like, I'm not. That is some candy right there. Like, you really get a chance to look into someone's service when you look at their chest candy, and not just like, oh, they've been to combat, but like you just see second awards, third awards. You see medals you've never seen before, and it's like, man, that's someone that needs respect. And it's interesting how that dynamic shifts just for a little bit during times where like you get a chance to see that out of people.
It's interesting that you bring that up, because we were just doing something in regard to uniforms and what have you, and it's funny hearing how the other branches do their rate and rank or their unit patches, in the Army or what have you. When you look at a Marine, you see a Marine, that's it. And then you have black chevrons on the collar, and everybody just looks the same. And you're exactly right. That's the one and only time where you get to, kind of see the visual resume, so to speak. And you're like, oh, wow,
exactly.
Okay. This guy's a regular jarhead 99.9% of the time.
Yep.
You see him in uniform like that, in dress or what have you, or evening dress. I mean, Jesus. Do you remember when Sergeant Major? Oh, God. Sergeant Major would show up in evening dress. He's like, these are the medals that I'm allowed to wear. It's like, oh my God. Okay. Right?
Yeah.
And
then on the other side of that, you would see that cocky sergeant who's got standard issue medals, and I was, I wasn't cocky, but I was definitely that sergeant, because I went to the MSG program quickly. And you just don't get stuff. You don't get stuff on the MSG program. Like, you get a couple ribbons for serving overseas, and at the end of it, they give you, the name as a sort of like a, attaboy. So you don't get. I never went to combat, so like my chest was very bare, but I was humbled by it. Like, I knew what that meant. I used my rank as the Marine Corps told me to, and that's it. And when you go to these events, and there's that guy who's cocky and tries to like throw his weight around against the lower enlisted and stuff, and then you see that he hasn't done shit in the Marine Corps. It's like, you probably need to step back and look at who you really are, because you're talking to a Lance Corporal with combat experience, like you own him, and that needs to change quickly. There's definitely chain of command, and that needs to be respected, but you need to respect the experience that Marine has had that you still haven't gotten yet.
Yeah, and it's interesting too, because there are some times where a guy, whether or not he has a ribbon for it or she has a ribbon for it, a lot of times, because we don't necessarily see that all day, unless you're in tune with your Marines, unless hey, Doc has been to combat before, he probably knows a lot of these processes. That's how they can add value to your fight also. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I saw that definitely as a police advisor in Afghanistan. I mean, having corpsmen that were coming from different areas, even from the hospital side, that they brought a unique sense of value to the fight and different considerations that we had. Especially, I mean, a shout out to Doc Rhodes and Doc Bagsby. Those guys, no matter what, every week came up with a different medical training scenario so that way we could run it over. We had MPs that were on our police advisor team. I'm an infantryman. I didn't know how to work with an MP. Christ, I didn't even know that they went to the field before I was a police advisor. But it was very interesting hearing their classes on TSC, on, proper, like, field interrogation techniques, questioning techniques, all of these other different things that you would not otherwise see. Because all you see is a Marine standing there with black chevrons on their collar. And it's like, no, the brain inside of that uniform is so valuable. Like, and that actually comes out in the Marine Corps ball also because, yeah, you get to see the guys who are stacked and the guys who aren't. And it's great that somebody like yourself, when you're saying, hey, that you weren't stat, but you had all of these amazing experiences, you've humbled yourself in that regard. But it's awesome. It's awesome that guys have that ability to go, you want to know something? We honestly, to steal a phrase from the Army, it is that ideology of one team, one fight, so it's great. One of my biggest things, and I swear to God, I hug every cook that I come up across, right? I do this as a grunt. I'm not joking. I love cooks. And here's why. Because MREs fucking suck. Okay? MREs suck. No one wants to eat MREs, whether they're in the field or on the post. So when I get the call over the radio that it's RTB and I know for a fact that hot chow's brewing, oh man, dude, that is like the number one thing that I am looking forward to when I cross inside that wire. You know what I'm saying? And it's like, dude, thank you so much. I understand that, like, some of these guys, they downgrade their service and what have you, but it's like you were in here receiving mortar fire and you decided to cook a meal for all of us. Like, thank you. Thank you so much. Like, I honestly, sincerely tell cooks that. And it's funny because every MOS has that. Every MOS has that. And I love that. So, anyhow, I just love the fact that, like, you had mentioned communication specifically. In my opinion, being the smallest, force, yet we are the expeditionary force. In all actuality, there is a lot of communication that needs to take place in a combined arms atmosphere. And in my opinion, which I'm quite biased, being a Marine, we do it very well. We can talk to the Air Force and call them in. We can call in for naval guns. We have Anglico. All of these different joint assets that go in towards our mission. And that's what I think is beautiful about it. And on top of it, we guard the president and the embassies. I mean, that's pretty cool. So I really can appreciate the every climb in place mentality and being able to add value wherever you go. So it's neat, man.
Definitely.
Yeah. It's interesting also to me in hearing your story and coming from MSG, which, by the way, I know you, and then here's another shout out from my good friend Chad Lane.
Oh yeah, okay, there we go.
Yep.
Yeah. I served with Chad in Algeria.
And it's funny because Chad is one of the most effective Marines I've honestly come across in my military career.
Yeah.
And Chad, right? And
Yep.
and I won't rag on him by any means. When you look at the guy, you're like, all right, here's a Marine, here's a good dude. He is one of those guys. He's got S-clips all over his gear. He's laughing right now because he knows it's true. He's got S-clips all over his gear. But what I love is he looks at me and he was like, all right, he's got his flak. All right, cool. I'm like, what's up, Chad? And he's like, dude, I'm setting my flak up exactly like yours because I'm pretty sure you understand how to do that correctly. And I just started laughing because it's the most logical response. And of course, Chad would come up with that. Did you know that he was running all of our logistics out of Lashkargah? I mean, just like a lone dude, a sergeant alone on a British base who's running logistics, via staff NCO and what have you up to Kajaki. But like, there's another aspect of effectiveness.
Yep.
You know what I mean? And what got him ready to do that? His service alongside you doing MSG. That is the reason why he was looked at as a responsible figure who could go and make liaison and be able to succeed in that mission.
Absolutely. Chad's a good Marine.
Yeah, man. It's funny. I love talking my boys up on here. Love you, Chad. It's interesting that you dabble in all of these different missions as far as podcasting is concerned. And it's it's very cool, and I admire and am inspired by your actions to be able to go out and fearlessly tell all of these individual stories. I think, to be honest with you, one of the most interesting topics is how to be homeless in D.C.
Yeah, that was unfortunately I didn't. It was I did it for an independent study, so it was one semester, and I really only had half the semester to really like dedicate to it because it was cold in DC. Like, there's I don't want to sound like I don't want to sound too privileged. Like, I'm not going on the cold to talk to homeless people, but like I tried, and like my hand would start shaking, and like it was just so difficult to get a comfortable conversation going with someone while we're both out there like miserable, and
Right.
so I only got a couple interviews in those settings, and like they shouldn't have been out there either, but unfortunately, some of them were, didn't have any choice, but it was difficult to get anybody talking, and because they're cold, they're preserving energy, they're giving me short answers, I'm freezing, my hands shaking, I don't want to be out there, so I had to wait till it got back up to the high 40s, low 50s before I could even start like going back out and talking to people. Then of course, but while I'm doing that, not everybody wants to be recorded, not everybody wants to talk. Some people aren't articulate, and so like 5 minutes into a conversation, realize I can't actually use this stuff, and so and I have the deadline if I have to have a final product on this day so it could be graded. So part two, if I were to do one, would be produced probably a little bit better with more material available to me, because I won't have that hard deadline, and I would do it in a time that there's more opportunity for me to go out and talk to people, and maybe I'll focus on just a couple different aspects of it, but it'll still be the same premise. But I think we can learn all day how people became homeless, and there's definitely, if we know a lot about that, we can try to prevent it. But a lot of times, the people that did just offer that information up, it was like simple stuff. Like I got let go from my job, and I was too old to get back into the industry. Like it was, people that were 52 years old, they got let go, and then no one's going to hire a 52-year-old in that industry, and or they got fired and they couldn't collect pension for a year, so they were just homeless for that year waiting for the pension to kick in. Or the classic, I got a divorce and they got most of it, and stuff like that. And so you hear just these normal stories, and so it's like, all right, well, I mean, you got here, I guess there was really no there's nothing we can really do about that, but like, how are you, it's been 6 months and it's in the same corner every day. Like, are you just maintaining life? Are you stashing money somewhere? Like, are you on the verge of dying soon? Like, what, how are you maintaining your life? And I thought that was a conversation I never really heard anywhere when people talk about homelessness. So that was, I think it was really unique in that sense.
Yeah, I think that your average citizen, not to call them out, would probably not approach the homeless community to just like sit down and just kind of chat about like how they exist. And I think that's another veteran thing where it's like, I don't know about you, but when I swore to defend the Constitution, it was one of those where it was every single human being that resided within America. We were fighting for our countrymen. So it's interesting. I don't look at it as a hierarchy or a class system. I try to break that understanding. But like, when you look at the homelessness that is occurring, around us, and of course we all know that a lot of veterans wind up homeless. It's interesting also that we as a veteran community would tap into that also. It's every single type of individual that we're looking to be able to support and help within our own causes and missions. So by highlighting that specific, area of our society, it definitely is not only going to bring awareness, but hopefully, start to push efforts from the veteran community towards that area of focus.
Yeah. It was definitely one of the more challenging things that I had done, just cold approaching homeless people and just being like, look, I want to talk to you about these things. And, I always came with either a couple bucks to offer for their I wanted to compensate them for their time. It was just as valuable as mine was, regardless of whether they're, whether I'm doing a school project or they're trying to, panhandle or whatever it may be. So I tried to compensate them for their time with some fruit and some, a couple bucks. Some of them were selling like a newspaper, so I would buy the newspaper from them, but I still had my safety in mind. I didn't I didn't approach large groups. I didn't go out at night, stuff like that. So I still had like my safety in mind. So, but it was definitely challenging to continuously approach people, and some people look at me like, no, like go away from me. And then some people are like, yeah, let's chat. And they're just like the most friendly people. Like, man, I want to be friends with you. Like at the end of the interview, like, man, I would love to hang out with you. So it was interesting, how we we make so many blanket statements about homeless people, but they're just as diverse as the rest of the population.
That's a cool dichotomy going on there. Yet another subculture.
Absolutely. And here's what's amazing. I found out that crime was like the biggest issue in homelessness. That a lot of the reasons why homeless people can't get themselves out of the situation is because they don't have anywhere to put their stuff. Right. And so like they get robbed a lot. And by other homeless people. So it's like the whole crabs in a bucket, cliche, where they're robbing from each other, they're assaulting each other, and it's because they don't have anywhere to put their stuff, and it's they have to sleep at some point, or they have people, they have other low dirt bag criminals that look at them as like vulnerable and easy targets. And that was mind-blowing, because you would never it made sense, but it's something I never would have considered if someone hadn't pointed it out.
Yeah. Well, a lot of times when I plan things through, what I will do is actually call upon the processes that I learned in the military. Or I'll just like quick fill out a Frago in my head, which sounds a little cheesy and a little motard, but the idea, though, the concept is there. Like, okay, this is the goal that I have. This is what I want to be able to achieve. These, the scheme maneuver. This is the stuff that I'm going to need. Did you actually have like a checklist, for when you go through this type of stuff, whether it be to go out and chat with homeless people, or a podcast checklist, or, do you have any SOPs that you use whenever you go about doing these podcasts?
Yeah. So most of my podcasts have a flow to them. And sometimes that flow is as simple as, here's always the opening question, here's how I like to end the show, and here are filler questions if nothing else really comes about. I'm probably a little bit more prepared for the Marson House podcast more than others, because I have very specific questions about each individual's music that I want to ask. Mm-hmm. But like for Fuel for Warriors, it opens with the what is a warrior to you, and it closes with what are challenges you're facing and what ultimately inspires you. And then in the middle, it's just this open conversation about the warrior culture, or what they're doing, or the military life, or WWF, which has actually come up in in a show. Like, just random stuff will come up. We'll just talk about it. I had checklists, and then like for One Too Many, I have checklists as far as what are some messages that I want to make sure that each story has an opportunity to get across. But they don't necessarily have to be there. I just want to make sure that they can. So with that show, I always let the guests just sort of tell the story as they best know it, and where they think it begins, whatever context they want to provide. I just sort of let them talk, and then I ask them sort of the same set of questions, more just to make sure that those messages have an opportunity of getting out there if they exist. Like, what did you learn from this, or how does this make you view suicide differently, stuff like that. So yeah, while I have basic checklists, I probably could do a better job of having I need a better start to finish checklist. And what I mean by that, of like the start being acquiring the guest's interest, all the way to the finish of being the week of promotion after the podcast is published. And I have loose checklists of what to do during the show, and I have loose checklists of sort of like what needs to happen as I like edit and publish the podcast. But something that would definitely take my routineness to the next level is if I had, a start to finish, really polished checklist for each show. And why I don't have it, probably just laziness. I haven't formally organized that list, but it's definitely, when you're the reason why I can do so many shows is because I have a routine, right? And when that routine gets disrupted is when my podcasting is inconsistent, when it loses quality, when it is less enjoyable. And so, I had about a year where I had someone editing my audio for me, and we were just pumping podcasts out left and right because all my podcasts just got recorded and sent to Dropbox. He would edit it and shoot me back over a finished episode. And I mean, we were I had like three shows going at the time, and we were just pumping out shows. And so when he can no longer do that, I hit a lull because now that's back on my plate. It disrupted my routine, and now I had to figure out what's going on. And then this summer, I've faced the same thing. I had this nice routine going with all my shows, 5 shows weekly. Like I wasn't missing a beat. And then the summer hits, and I'm helping my parents move. I'm helping my girlfriend get ready for a move. I'm, visiting friends in LA. I went to a wedding and all this sort of stuff, and it disrupted my routine. I'm still managing to get stuff done, but it disrupted my routine enough to where I noticed that that interview wasn't as good as it was, or I wasn't prepared for that one, or oops, I missed this week. I thought I had one, but I guess I didn't. And so checklists are great. Routine is even more valuable, especially when you're trying to pump out a lot of quality content.
Right on. Very cool. Well, that sounds like some great podcasting advice. What would be your biggest piece of advice if you had a Marine standing in front of you right now? He's transitioning out. He wants to go into entrepreneurship. What do you got for this individual?
He wants to get into entrepreneurship. So, probably I would give him a quick reading list. He would have to read Essentialism by Gregory McCown, I think. I would still have him read The 4-Hour Work Week, even though it's a decade old. I think that the messages behind what Tim Ferriss is talking about are still translatable to today. And a lot of them are still applicable. I'd have him read Choose Yourself by James Altucher. And I think that would be it. And then I'd have him subscribe to the Ask Pat podcast with Pat Flynn. And with that set of material, he would be set on how to. So Choose Yourself would definitely help him focus on what his real passion is and where he's actually going to focus his attention, where his efforts are going to be put. Tim Ferriss's, the 4-Hour Work Week helps with a lot of the process and making sure that he's not wasting time, making sure that he's learning what he needs to learn quickly, stuff like that. And then Essentialism really focuses on how to give your highest contribution at the best time possible. And it's a really great book when talking about like what it means to go through a daily routine of constantly giving high contribution. And then Ask Pat is a daily show where Pat Flynn gives out small pieces. He just answers questions about online business and business in general and social media and podcasting and blogging and a lot of stuff that has to do with online and offline businesses, practices. And it's really practical advice every single day. And I don't listen to it every time, but when I do get a chance to listen to it, I always come away with something that I need to consider from my own efforts. So with that, that Marine would be ready to make a decision of, I'm going to get into this industry. This is going to be, I'm going to have this daily routine like this. I'm going to know that, this is what my practices on meetings are and email and stuff like that. And then here's my highest point of contribution. And this is where my efforts are solely going to lie.
Wonderful.
With that transitioning out, how did networking with other veterans play a role in that, or did you go that route to start out?
Like if I saw Jake Wood in a bar or something like that, we would shake hands, sit down, and share stories. We're not friends in any sense of the word, but we're familiar with each other. We respect each other's efforts, and he has done what he can at his level to support my efforts, and that was being on my podcast, and and stuff like that. And I, promote Team Rubicon when I can. And that came because because I decided to do podcasting, because I continue to reach out to other veterans, successful at any level, and I show appreciation for their efforts. I show that I'm behind them. And because of that, I can walk up to anybody that I've had on my show and be like, hey, Tim Lawson with the Veteran Empire, Tim Lawson with One Too Many. And immediately I'm recognizable. We get that mutual respect. Like I brought you on my show because I admire you. You came on my show because, you respect what I'm doing. And, the veteran community has been, that network is so strong now, to where now I'm just constantly finding ways to better myself professionally. And a lot of that has come through what I call these virtual mentors, which are mentors that you don't really get to meet like in person and stuff. But you still consume a lot of their material, like their podcasts or books and stuff like that. And so that's where, Altucher and Ferris and the rest of them come in. But podcasting has hands down been the number one networking tool that I've had in my life, and it's because I'm just constantly talking to people that are doing cool things, and now they at least recognized my name if we were to ever see each other in person.
Thank you so much. And hey, listening audience, don't forget to subscribe, rate, review the podcast, give us your comments, join the conversation. Literally, your comments make the show. You dictate who we're going to talk to and who we're going to interview, what you want us to talk about. Check out Tim Lawson on his latest upcoming podcast adventure. He's going through myriads of them. Well, Tim, thank you so much for your time, brother. Seriously, Semper Fi and carry on, man. That is awesome. Core!
Yet.
Hell yes.
Let's get into the nitty-gritty here.
Remaining committed to the culture of your show.
Finding new audiences to expose yourself to.
I think that your average citizen, not to call them out, would probably not approach the homeless community like, wow! Like, oh, fuck!
Where did that come from?